Hello and welcome to the Holographic Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Tone D, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kyle, the salty Kyle. That's what I got today, Kyle.
That's fine.
What's new and good, my friend?
Well, progress on the old arm, but more specifically than that, see that out there? That old
There it is.
boat? That's a 1959 Penn Yan, 17-foot lapstrake. Just picked it up at a barn, real cheap, and
Nice.
I'm in love.
Was it a barn sale?
No, it was just a boat for sale in a barn. Got a boat for sale in a barn. I bought a boat for sale in a barn.
That sounds great.
It's
That sounds fantastic.
It's new and good.
Nice. I like it. Welcome to the podcast. We have a lot to talk about today. We have some real fun stuff and some real boring stuff. So we'll start with the fun stuff. No, just kidding. Nothing too boring. So last week on the podcast, we spoke of the holographic nature of the universe. And I want to talk a little bit about string theory that relates to the holographic nature of the universe. So in physics, Kyle, I don't know how much you know about physics. I actually, in school, I wasn't really into physics a whole lot. I took physics in high school, but then in my early 30s, I started reading a lot of books about physics. I really started getting into physics. And I think that it's not as accessible to the average person because of the mathematics involved. But for me, it was more about the philosophical connections and using physics to understand the world around me. And I think that regular people can relate to physics. You don't necessarily have to be a math whiz to relate to physics. So there's two basic schools of physics, which is the large school, the classical theories, which describe bodies in motion and describing, if I threw my hat, it would describe how the hat flies, and it describes how planets move. And then there's quantum physics, which is the very small world. It describes how atoms and neurons electrons and neutrons and protons, and how those move through the universe. And those equations are much different. So the quantum equations and the classic equations don't mesh. They don't work. You can't do the same equations to describe a planet as you do to describe protons and electrons and quarks and things like that. So string theory is a theory that tries to combine the two. So string theory, the mathematics behind string theory tries to bring it all together. They try to call it a unified theory. And it's relatively new. It's been around for, 40, 50 years. But one of the problems with string theory is you can't prove it except for mathematics, or it's very difficult to prove except for mathematics. And one of the reasons is a string, the description of a string is a Planck length, is very small. Kyle, are you familiar with a Planck length?
No.
So a Planck length is 10 to the negative 34 meters, negative 34.
That's really small.
It's very small. So the smallest observed and measured length in existence is only 10 to the negative 18. And I believe those were described with particle accelerators. Are you familiar with particle accelerators? They send these particles around this giant tube at very, very high speeds, and they smash them together. And those create teeny tiny particles. And that's how they discovered a lot of these teeny tiny particles. And one of the teeny little particles, if it does something interesting, then they find a new one. And I think that's how they found the smallest length is through a particle accelerator. That's only 10 to the negative 18.
I just paid a little bit of money for the internet. So there's some do-it-yourself plans for a backyard particle accelerator.
Nice.
I just broke ground today. I just, had to buy a new shovel for that.
Fucking A. Let's do it. It's going to take a lot of energy. I think you might take all the energy of Enosburg Falls to make a particle accelerator.
I think I might take all the energy of Enosburg Fall to make this much of a particle accelerator. But we're going to try.
So if 10 to the negative 34, I think it's 1.6 times 10 to the negative 34 as a Planck length. it's not provable, it's not describable, it's not, we can't observe it, it's so small. An analogy is uh, if the earth, or excuse me, if an atom was blown up to the size of the entire earth, um, a Planck length would then be a proton on that atom. And so it's hard to describe. It's hard to make analogies. Basically, it's so infinitesimally small. And that's what they're saying, are these strings are that size, and they're little strings or vibrations. There's one theory called M theory where the string is actually one continuous string. It's like a membrane. So last week we spoke of the holographic universe. In the holographic universe, you have an implicit reality and an explicit reality. And so this reality that we see, that we create, that's around us, is the explicit reality that we're creating with our mind from light and energy. So in string theory, there's no way to prove that at this point, that these strings actually exist, but they're describing them as vibrations that are infinitesimally small. So in my mind, and I've never read this before, I've never heard anyone say this before in all my readings of physics, maybe someone did, I don't know, but I've never read it. In my mind, those strings are a great representation to show that that is the implicit reality, that's a mathematical way to say, okay, the implicit reality is these tiny, tiny vibrational things. And one of the problems with modern science is that it's hard to put things together. You're a specialist in one field, you're a specialist in physics, you're a specialist in astronomy, or astrophysics, or so and so, and it's hard for physics, or it's hard for scientists to put everything together. And that's what I like to do. That's my specialty with science, is saying everything is connected. And that to me is a perfect example of how everything is connected, that this theory of the infinitesimally small world is, or could be, our implicit reality that's around us, is these teeny little things that our mind is taking, and our human mind has a hard time to explain, and then we put it into a big reality that's in front of us. What do you think, Kyle? Am I full of shit?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that graphic representation would help me here to a certain degree. And, I wanted to touch on a couple of things. I'm not sure how much I can speak to that, because I haven't read what you've read, and I'm not as familiar with the concepts. But if you're talking about something that's so small as to be existing in a place where, if an atom was blown up to the size of the earth, and one of these strings is the size of a proton on that atom, are our brains really capable of transforming that implicit reality into an explicit reality? Or is it just too small? Because we exist, I feel like, more on a cellular level, which would be like the size of a galaxy,
right?
In that sense.
Right.
So I'm not sure I buy it, buddy boy.
I hear what you're saying. And it's interesting, because one of the things with string theory is that the theory works when there's 11 dimensions. And so the dimensions that we think, traditional dimensions, width, height, depth, and time, the 4 dimensions, the rest of the dimensions are basically get smaller. So as you get smaller and smaller, they say those are the extra dimensions. And there are different ways of looking at teeny things. I can't describe it right now.
It's a challenging topic.
Yeah, it's a challenging topic, and it's hard to explain to other people. You have to think about it a long time. So these teeny small dimensions are dimensions that our mind have a hard time dealing with. Our mind does absolutely have a very difficult time comprehending, even describing to another human. So how can we, put those dimensions into a reality? And so, to your point, I think that's exactly, in my mind, why it proves the holographic universe, is because if the true nature of reality are these teeny tiny dimensions and these teeny tiny things, as creatures that evolved on this planet to be macro, to be larger, we've created this reality that is out of touch with the real tiny reality, because out of necessity to survive. And so that's a point that you brought up that to me shows how this holographic nature of the universe in our minds is the way it is. And that is because out of necessity.
How can we somehow bring the implicit and the explicit a little bit closer together? Why do they have to be so opposed? You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know. The quick answer to that is I'm not sure. I think the long answer is that it's because we as large macro creatures, if we were connected with that small reality, we wouldn't be able to get to the size we are. So like so here's a thing to imagine as a human. Imagine yourself as an ant, or even go smaller. Are you familiar with water bears, tardigrades, these small little creatures,
Yeah.
right? So imagine yourself as a water bear, a tardigrade, a teeny little creature. Right. I'm sorry, what's that?
Like, can't tardigrades survive in space?
Survive in a vacuum, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I think so. So imagine yourself as one of these creatures and how you view the world. The universe would look so different from how we view the world. So as creatures got bigger and bigger, the only way we were able to evolve into bigger creatures that were more successful and that had this kind of success on this planet is to change the way that reality was, so we can negotiate through our biosphere. So that's my answer to that question.
That's got a little bit more, for me, that's got a little bit more of a continuity in terms of an idea. The one thing I would just sort of take a minute to add to the topic, and it's less about the actualities of string theory or whatever, is that, I would say small is something that we need to start thinking about much more as a species. Humans are always striving for bigger, better, more. And small is something that's really, really important, and I think often overlooked. And even, let's just look, going, in gargantuan proportions compared to your Planck, what were they? Planck particles?
Planck length.
Planck length. Let's just look at, we're not going to look at, but I'm going to use an example, nanotechnology. Mm-hmm. Fascinating, unbelievably exciting, really, really alarming and scary when you think about what happens when you shrink things to that level. And that is like really, really massive compared to what you're talking about. But right. I know that I read years and years ago, an article in Scientific American that basically said all the things we know about physics on our plane, when you shrink them down to nano level, the rules do not apply. They're completely different. So things just pass through previously impermeable membranes. Particles can pass through them at a nanotech. Right. So for me, it's always been really exciting in the idea that we can go in and rebuild and reconstruct like cancerous things, or, like get rid of that, or make yourself like health relating to health issues. But at the same time, when things act in a way that's completely baffling, it's really, really weird. Like they're putting microbial silver in garments right now on a nano level, and it basically just sucks right into your body, which is crappy. If I'm going to get sick, it's going to be from smoking cigarettes. I'm doing it. It's my choice. I paid the money, and God damn it, I'm going to die. I'm in control, but I don't need to buy underpants or it's going to kill me in the same way. Thank you very much.
Well, silver is actually a natural antimicrobial, antibacterial. That's why they use it.
Which I like, but I don't want silver at a nano level. I'll take silver at a regular, hold it in your hand kind of way. I
And
don't
to,
need it.
and to your point, you're absolutely right. And to your point, our macro world, our human lives and bodies are so fragile, and on that micro world and on that those in that nano world, we basically mean nothing to them. And if something got out of control, that's the end. That's
Yeah.
it would just whoosh, whoosh, you know.
The one other thing I wanted to say is that very originally, when you were talking about physics, I always thought it was lamentable that physics was always held in high school science as the senior year science
Mm-hmm.
that average and or advanced kids got to take, because that was the standard way it was when I was in school. You did earth science, bio, chem, and physics.
Me too.
But a lot of medium to below average students would not take that fourth year of science, and so therefore they wouldn't get the physics. And I always thought that was lamentable, because physics, while it is in fact a lot of theory and a lot of math, there is so much physics that is not theoretical. It's the push and the pull.
Right.
Physics, ouch, physics. You can do physics every day when you throw a ball, like you said, when you throw your hat up in the air. So I always thought that there was so much room in a high school curriculum for applied physics, or what I would call tangible physics. And I went to an alternative senior year program because I was gone.
You were
But I always felt I always felt like I missed something, because I like physics. I like everyday physics. I like watching wave technology, waves. I like watching waves. I fly model airplanes, and there's air currents. That's all, that's natural stuff. But those theories, those rules and regulations, that's all physics.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that I had that experience even at the time. And I think what happens to a lot of people, for me, it happened to me at the time. I didn't appreciate it. I did learn, I did absorb things, and I'm glad I did. But at the time, I really didn't appreciate it. It took me another decade to appreciate the physics that I had taken and to expand on that. And I think that's one of the issues that we have in our education program is, and actually I'm going to bring that up in our topics later, that you're going to talk about, is learning later in life. That just because they have those things in high school doesn't mean you have to stop learning in high school.
Absolutely, 100%.
So that's going to bring us to our next subject, which we touched on briefly last week. So last week we talked about the elephant in the room, which is American politics right now, which is it is September of 2020, and it's kind of a crazy time in American politics. There's always tumultuous times throughout the history of our world. I'm not saying, some people say, oh, this is crazier than it's always been. And I disagree. I don't think it's crazier than it's always been. There's always tumultuous times. There's always issues with politics and power-hungry people and all sorts of things like that. Not that this time is not important and tumultuous for us in our lives. It absolutely is. But it's not like the world hasn't seen this before. But anyway, so in our time right now, it's really crazy. Kyle and I talked about politics, and I said, can American politics survive as it is? And I said, no. Kyle said, yes. Before I turn it over to Kyle to tell me why American politics can survive, I'm going to tell you why American politics can't survive as is, and why that is not a bad thing. I'll tell you exactly why that's not a bad thing. So our Constitution, our American Constitution, was written, 200 and, 35, 45 years ago now. It's an old document. It's a document that was written when things culturally were much, much different. And I think it's time for a change. I think that document is outdated. I think that because of the nature of the culture at the time and how the document was written and our politics, the nature of our politics, we've gotten into a cycle that is unbreakable as is. And when I say as is, I mean, it's not that our culture is doomed. It's not that our people are doomed. It's that our political structure is doomed as is. I think we need a new structure, a new set of rules and ideals. I'm not sure if it can be amended. I don't know. I don't think we can just make a bunch of amendments and everything will be fine. I think we might have to start over. And I actually have a couple ideas, and I'm going to save that for another podcast because I have some ideas that I've had for many, many years, and I want to tell them to the world. But before we get into that, I'm just going to say that as is, I don't think that the American political system should or can survive. And the reason that's not a bad thing is because the change, the switch to a better system is necessary, and it's going to be good for our people. It's going to be good for society. It's going to be good for, the planet and everyone as a whole if we adopted some new ways of looking at it and some new rules. That's why I think the current American political system should and cannot survive. Kyle, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm not generally an optimist in my everyday life. I'm not a pessimist either. I'm more of a circumstantial optimist or a circumstantial pessimist when it comes to politics and my belief in humanity. I tend to vacillate. I think that the American experiment actually has a lot of merit, and I think that even though there are a lot of things that are outdated in the rules and regulations that we set forth, let's say for simplicity purposes, constitutional law or constitutional theory or whatever you want to say. I don't think that I'm ready to throw that stuff away. The problem is not that we need to rewrite the rules. The problem is that we just need to start obeying the rules. We have it written down in the Constitution. Basically, let's just shorten it up real quick. The American ideal is the golden rule, more or less. It's kind of a do unto others, equality for all, the liberty and pursuit of happiness. That is all as appropriate now as it was then. But in my opinion, somehow, some way, we've gotten away from really being able to look at it from a blown out perspective. Everything is so myopic in terms of, okay, prosperity has to happen, but we're ignoring the at what expense part, especially recently. So, everything moved so quickly, so in such a short amount of time. I'm not saying that it was nobody's fault. It was all of our fault. Collectively, we just decided to ignore the rules and the regulations, and people suffered so that you and I can do this technological awesomeness and live in our places with our heat and our food supplies and all this other stuff. But I don't think it's doomed at all. I think that what we need to do is we really just need to start obeying some of the rules and regulations that we put forth. And I think we need to modify certain things as well that we can now look at from that outside perspective and say, well, this was put down and we like the rule, but the way it exists now, there's these people that are suffering immeasurably. So can we really sustain that rule the way it is now, or do we need to apply some more regulations? And that's me. I mean, that's a classic sort of thing. I'm not pro-regulation in everywhere, in every aspect of government, but I'm definitely pro-regulation where people can take advantage, and people are. The rules were written, but like you said, they were written at a different time. And since that time, there have been corporations and fat cats and people that are taking unfair advantage. 100 years ago, what was it? I mean, history was good for me, but it's all gone. I got to reread it all the time. But the robber barons, right? I mean, are we not living in a modern age of robber barons?
Absolutely, we are. So
we are.
But the reason, so I see your point, and I think you have an extremely valid point. It's a very common point. I think a lot of people bring up that, yeah, we just need to follow these rules and bring us back to kind of a base level. And I agree with you. Yes.
I was just going to say, this is a good point for me to interject something that we are talking about. And we'll go into this when you want to, but I think that a good way to get us back to the ideals and for everybody to sort of understand and start to intrinsically follow those regulations, those rules that were put down in good faith, is the reintroduction or the boost in importance, reboost, let's say, of two things. And this is a fairly simplistic view, but I think the two things are very important here: civics and nutrition.
Civics and nutrition.
Civics and nutrition. There are dozens of other things, 100 other things. I'm not saying everything else goes out the window, but I'm saying that two things, and I'll go into this if and when you're ready. Civics and nutrition would help us elevate to where we would be more in line with the ideals that we set forth all those years ago, which I think still have value.
Absolutely. And when we're going to talk about that in a little bit, and we'll talk about what that means for the folks at home. We'll talk about exactly what that means. But before we get to that, I just want to say, I see your point. I on a base level, I agree with your point, and so I don't think that you're straight up necessarily wrong. But here's where I'm coming from. When you look at history, when you actually study the specifics of our history, it's hard because right now everyone's saying like, oh, this is wrong and this historian is wrong and blah blah blah, and that's the problem with a lot of history, is that it's really, the victor tells a different story and different historians tell it differently. But if you look at actual cultural history, and if you look at facts, the culture that created our Constitution and the people that created our Constitution were a vastly different culture and people. And so the point that you're making is that if we could just get to those rules and everyone follows the rules, and, where there could be compassion for everyone. But the culture back then did not have compassion for everyone. Not only did they not have compassion for 3/4 of their other fellow humans, because if non-whites weren't included, but also women weren't included. So only white men were included, which was only about 1/4 of the population. So, or maybe a little bit more than that, but less than half. So, but I'm not blaming them. I'm not saying like, oh, how horrible. I'm just saying that's the culture that we're dealing with. But it goes beyond that, even because even when I came into this world, when young Tony was born, I was a poor white man. I didn't have any money. My family didn't come from money. My family were immigrants. So at the time, also people with no money and immigrants were looked on as basically trash. It was the aristocracy. It was the people who were wealthy businessmen who had and wanted to keep the power. Now, I'm not taking away from what they created and the ideas that they had, because they did have some good ideas. But because of the culture that they lived in, they didn't create a document that was for everybody. They created a document that was essentially for other wealthy businessmen. And that document was to get them to the future of being wealthy white businessmen. And so what I'm saying is that, to your point, if we could just get back to that baseline, in my opinion, that baseline is only for certain people. That's why I think it should change. The reason I think it should change is so that baseline that you want to get to is only for certain people. And so it structurally, institutionally, and structurally, we will never be able to get to that baseline of everyone, because there was no baseline of everyone.
No, because the thing about it is you're right on a lot of that. And maybe they had it in their mind that this is only for us, and it is, because we don't do women, we don't do black people, we don't do immigrants, and we don't do anybody else. We don't do Jews, and we don't do Catholics. All no. But what they wrote was not that. What's on the paper says that all men, and all we have to do is add humans.
It doesn't work though. It
Why?
Didn't work. If all we had to do is add humans, it would work, but it's not.
But it can. I'm saying we don't have to throw it away. We do not have to throw it away. We just need to start we just need to change the words a little bit. All men and women and children are created equal, and all of us have these inalienable rights. I think that listen, I know what you're saying, and those people were in their own way, they were indoctrinated, and even though they were screaming away from persecution, and that's the reason they were leaving persecution, and that's why they wrote something that I believe is actually applicable. The issue is how we execute it. And so far, there's been great parts about our society, and there's been terrible parts about our society. And I'm not sure where I'm going to go 50-50 on this one, if not lopsided towards the bad. Really. I mean, honestly, let's face it, things are, even with those rules and regulations on the books and those ideals that everybody was sort of living under and by, we still stuck our thumb down on all sorts of people. We marginalize people and continue to do it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the words contained in the American political tradition are not still ideologically good and pure.
And I think that you can be right. And I don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here saying
purity.
Pure. I'm not sitting here and saying I'm 100% right. And I think that's one of the problems with our discussions and I think that's one of the problems with with our society right now is people will sit and say, I'm 100% right and you're 100% wrong. And I think that's just not a good way to move forward. So I'm not saying I'm 100% right and you're 100% wrong. I'm not even saying I'm 70, 30. I'm just, so I do somewhat agree with you. And for many, many years, I was more on your side as well. The reason that I'm thinking the more along the lines of of how I'm thinking is because of the way that society, culturally, how our society has changed so much in the last 150 years. I think since the Industrial Revolution, there's been leaps and bounds in cultural changes. Every single decade, there's a new group that fights for rights. And it's interesting because if you look at it, the Constitution, according to what you're saying, the Constitution was written so those people can get rights, but they never get them until they fight for them. Women didn't get the right to vote until they fought. People think women went and said, oh, we want the right to vote, and it was so easy. It wasn't. They went to jail. They were harassed. They were oppressed. And then it was, African Americans, Black people had to fight for their civil rights. After they gained freedom, it was another 100 years before they had any, real civil rights. And now we're looking at LGBTQ. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right.
There's a T in
LGBTQ people, and they're fighting for their rights. And there's a lot of marginalized people in our society. And so I think that over the last 120 years, let's say, there's been such a change in cultural paradigms that I believe we need a new document and a new set of rules to adjust to those new cultural paradigms that we're going through. That's why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking, but I also appreciate what you're saying. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't just completely eliminate this thing that has been, was a good idea at the time. So I get what you're saying.
That's all it's ever been, Tony, is a good idea. Again, the idea is great. The execution has been as flawed as anything human has ever been.
And is that ever going to change? That'll be a different conversation. Can human execution?
That's the question. That's the question. Can we finally live up to the ideals that we all know or feel are not all, but that many of us feel or know to be true? That's the hard part.
Let's say we had a perfect document that was written so clearly and so perfectly. Could we as humans even execute it properly? And it's interesting because last week we talked about being in a matrix relating to the holographic universe, right? And the movie The Matrix, the first Matrix supposedly was a perfect world, and humans couldn't handle it because they rejected it because there's no choice. So that's the interest. We'll talk about that next time. What's that, Kyle?
You're a plague, a virus.
That's right. Exactly. So can the virus of human beings even get to a point where we, have compassion for everybody? I'm not sure.
We can.
All right. If I said we can't, it would make a good conversation, but I actually believe we can as well. I believe we can in the future also.
Okay.
So that was a good discussion. I want to move on to 80s movies wisdom. Last week we spoke of Conan the Barbarian. We're going to stay with Conan the Barbarian for a little bit longer because I think that Conan the Barbarian, has a lot of wisdom that he can teach us.
Wow.
Wow. So in the movie, Conan has a god, and when he sees something, he calls to this god, Crom. Kyle, do you know who Crom is? Can you tell us who Crom is?
No.
You can't tell us who Crom is.
Well, I mean, is Crom a real? He's not a real deity.
No, I'm not expecting you to know for certain. I thought you might have an idea.
Well, let me think for a second.
No seconds. You get zero time.
No. You sprung this on me. I'm trying to think of what Conan's father said to him, and I know that Crom is an earth god because Crom lives in the ground. At the same time, Conan later talks about Crom and Valhalla and how, you get cast before him and he will cast you out of Valhalla and laugh at you. That is Crom strong on his mountain. He's strong on his mountain. Crom. That's Crom.
Crom.
I don't know.
So, we have this Judeo-Christian tradition, and not just this country, but in the entire world, that I believe.
Need multiple devices, man.
I believe that certain extreme sects of religion can get toxic. I think that there's certain organized religious sects in this country and in the world that are toxic, and I'm not a fan of them. If people want to believe what they want to believe, that's fine, and I'm all for believing what you want to believe.
Can we say certain, or can we say all of them have toxicity at a certain level?
Absolutely. I agree. All of them have toxicity at a certain level. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%. Every single one. Even Buddhism. I mean, I've studied Buddhism. For the folks at home, I'm a martial artist. Buddhism is very closely related to that. And I actually went to see this high Buddhist priest. He was a Turton. He's like a couple steps down from the Dalai Lama. And everyone was enamored by this gentleman, and people were bowing, and he was a dick, frankly. And I did not get good energy from him. And I thought it was a very toxic situation. And people were like, well, it's Buddhism. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. When you get to these high levels, it's toxic.
Aren't Buddhists the people that are responsible for raping and killing the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar?
I believe so. Yes. Yes.
There you go.
How
Buddhist is that? Rape and torture and murder.
Right. And so, and it has to do with, becoming cult-like and having these dogmas that have nothing to do with reality or compassion. When you get to a dogma that tells you what to do and not to understand the world, then it's toxic. And that's why I like Crom, because Conan's not sure. Conan says to his buddies, he's like, what gods do you pray to? Because he's okay with people praying to other gods, because it's not about just the dogma of Crom. It's about, it could be Crom. It could not be Crom. We don't know.
He also, in the movie, I'm pretty sure, he says, somebody asked him the same thing. And he says, I pray to Crom, but, he seldom listens. So He knows that he can't, even though he has faith in him, the faith is not something that he uses to steer him through life. He's taking his own path. And as we Conan people know, long outside the movie, but within the confines of the Conan universe, Conan becomes a king. He's a barbarian. He's a reaver. He's an explorer, but he becomes a king. Crom doesn't help him in that quest. It helps him to a certain degree in terms of being solidarity and having something, but it's not a guide, you know?
Kyle, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm not even going to say anything else because I think you're absolutely correct. And I'm going to move on because there's nothing else to say. You just said it all. So,
Oops.
in our, no, that's not oops. That's perfect.
Okay.
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what we do. We say it all. So our next topic, we're going to talk about a way to move forward, a way to learn. And I think, as Kyle brought up earlier, one of those ways, and there's countless number of ways, but we can't talk about every single one of them. But one of the ways is civics and nutrition. Civics and nutrition. Let's talk about it. But it seems boring at first, like, oh, civics and nutrition. But the more you think about it and the more you talk about it, it's so important. It's so relevant. And so I hope that we can bring out some of that importance and relevance in this conversation. Kyle, can you just start by telling me, because I'm not super familiar with the definition of physics. Can you tell me what is civics? What is civics? Civics.
Yeah, so civics is, in a nutshell, it's basically the rights and duties of citizenship. Okay. And I was sitting around the other day, and I wasn't deliberately thinking about our podcast or how to make things better, but it just sort of dawned on me. And there's a million. These aren't the only two things that will take us to where we should be, we could be, we need to be, yada yada yada, and however many iterations we might have. But my thought process was this, and it's up for debate. Is that it seems to me that those two topics, civics and nutrition, which are very broad topics, can pay dividends in the long run in terms of our our populace having a better foundation from which to move forward into a more enlightened society. Okay, and without going super deep into the rabbit hole and me just talking on end, I will go ahead and illustrate a couple of quick parallels or problems and how I think civics and nutrition can help. And this is sort of outlines my thought process. We all know that there is a problem with voter turnout, correct?
Correct.
There's a problem with voter turnout. I don't know what the percentage is, but yeah, I think 40% of our nation votes, maybe, and 60% doesn't, maybe very roughly. Well, when you bring it back to the original definition of civics, like the rights and duties of citizenship, there's your very, very most basic right and duty of citizenship is to vote. It's to choose your chosen representatives in, the leadership of the nation. Okay, people that are beholden to you. 60% of the population doesn't do it. Okay, so that's just the very, very first sort of version of it. If you want to go on something a little bit more local, let's say, volunteering or charitable work within your community. There are a lot of people that do it, but again, the level of people that do it versus the level of people that don't do it are massively skewed. And I feel like if children, and I believe they are taught this for a minute, but then it stops, if it's something that's a more continual process, so it's not just something you learn in school and it's boring, it's civics and fucking civics, blah, 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 I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that. What if you gave students an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? You can stay in class and you can read about the Constitution and all the good things in it, the timeless good things in the Constitution.
Bullshit. Sorry.
Or you can pick a project and leave the school grounds and go and help Mildred Strang plant her flowers, which she's been doing for 50 years. That's your civic duty, because you're helping an old person in the community. There's a million different ways. The point that I'm making is that there is not enough stress on actually doing things that are tangible, supportive things within the community. Everybody's flying their fucking flags. They do trucks and the freedom with the flag, with the truck and the freedom and the guns and all this other shit. And that's all fine and good, because I like trucks and freedom and guns. I like all those things. But if all you're going to do is fly the flag and buy your ammo and shoot your guns and burn your gas, and you're never going to do anything else, it's all a house of cards. It's all bullshit, man. It's all fucking bullshit. Okay. So if we can drive that into people and make it, that would be, I think it would pay dividends. Should I take a break? Do you want to say something?
What? Why would I want to say something? This is only my fucking show, Kyle. Jesus fucking H Christ.
I'm sorry.
Sorry for no, I'm just teasing you. Sorry for the potty mouth. We're a free show here. We believe in our freedoms to say what we want. And I think that you're absolutely right. Now, is it possible? Because, well, let me go back to the voter turnout thing. So voter turnout, if you look at how voter turnout is, it's not necessarily by choice. I don't think that the voter turnout is so poor in this country because people just say, oh, I don't really want to vote. I think voter turnout is so poor in this country because of voter suppression, because of how they make it difficult for people to vote. So is it possible that the lack of the lack of civics in curriculum, the lack of pushing people to have better community, more community service, is the community minded, the lack of that in our communities and in our curriculum and in our schools, is that I'm not even going to say conscious, I will say, is that a subconscious thing that's been going on from the leaders of this country to make it so people aren't engaged so they maintain power? Is that possible?
It's possible, for sure, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. At the same time, yeah, this is why, like, okay, so again, these were two simple ideas, which I feel are grand and wonderful. But there, here we are going deep in the rabbit hole. There are major, major obstacles. Yes, it is very possible. And yes, voter, you make a completely valid point. You're not going to hear any arguments from me on that end. There is a tremendous amount of voter suppression, and people are just trying to fucking get by and live their lives. And it's not the most important thing. I don't want it to be the most important thing. I just feel like if it was more pervasive in terms of how it was presented from the get-go and who it was presented to, because this goes back and taps into your idea of the founding fathers and the way that the Constitution and all these things were written. They may not have been written for the people that are currently parts of our society, that certain people don't want playing an active role. And you are 100% right that voter suppression is alive and well. The whole gerrymandering thing is alive and well. Redlining is starting to get like real. Should I go this way instead? You like the pointer?
No, I just thought I'd join the club. So the question is, you said, it's important about who this is taught to and who gets involved. Now the question is who teaches it and who brings it? So is it just teachers? Is it just curriculum? Or, who else has to get involved here?
Let's face it. We're living in a new age of United States anti-intellectualism. It's never gone away. Right. It's always been part of our culture. Right. Let's face it. But it's resurged now. All of a sudden, the geek and the nerd, they were cool for like 2 decades after Silicon Valley and all this other shit, But now, all of a sudden, let's beat the shit out of them again. It's no longer cool to be smart. Now it's really cool to be dumb again, because that's how things are. You know, it's like, I mean, I'm generalizing greatly, but let's face it, people are not open. Like, I'm a hard sell, man. I'm an obstinate, stubborn son of a bitch. But if you present a case and it holds some water, I can say I'm wrong. I can say I'm sorry. I got zero problems with that. And I think that there's a lot of pig-headedness in society. Again, going back to this idea, I just feel like if it was a more robust part of what we teach children, who those children are, ideally, in my brain, it's every child of the whole country. You know what I mean?
So you think it's a school thing, like at school?
That's all I got to go on, man. I mean, yeah, no, it's more of well, yes, it's a school thing first. I mean, it would be great if parents taught that, but parents? I mean, really? I mean, you need a license to fish. You need a license to be a fucking fucked up dad. You know? What the hell kind of shit is that? You need a license to drive a car. You know, but you don't need a license to make a baby. So forget about the parents thing. You know, we still have free and appropriate public education. And by and large, that system, as screwy as it is, it really does positively affect a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of negatives and there's lots of room for improvement. But let's face it, it is a way to channel information. It is a way to create better citizens. And so, yes, I think that school would be an important part. And the thing about it is you have to make it interesting. You can't, like I said, you can't just shove it down their throat and be like,
yeah, you have to get them engaged, like you said, with like the community. Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you get people engaged? By disengaging them from the walls of the school. You pull them out and you give them tangible experience with old people. That's what they need. You got to take young people and old people and put them together.
What about the people in the middle? What about us middle-aged fucks?
That's not what I'm talking about right now.
I agree with you. And I was asking the question, so it's a school thing. And as I'm thinking about it, you're absolutely right. It is a school thing, and it has to do with engaging in schools and making teachers and schools better. But I'm not putting blame on teachers here. I think that there is kind of weird anti-teacher thing where people are like, well, teachers have it so easy and blah, blah, blah. And that's not true. And we're in a tough spot because we're losing a lot of teachers. There are not enough teachers in this country, and there needs to be more respect for teachers, and parents need to, let them do some more, let them smack the kids around. No, just kidding. I didn't mean that.
I want to make it crystal clear that neither Tony nor I in any way, shape, or form are putting this on teachers as any sort of blame. I'm going to go ahead and speak for Tony on this one.
No, you're right.
Yeah. It is not them. It is a curriculum thing, and that is really hard. I mean, I was supposed to be a teacher, but I'm not because it was too.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and I completely agree with you. And I want to talk more about this another time, but we actually have to wrap it up. We're getting real close to the end, and I don't.
We didn't even get to nutrition, man.
I know. That's why we're going to talk about nutrition next time.
Okay, we can do that.
Before we go,
speaking of nutrition, I like to chew my martini.
Before we go, we're going to finish up with ripping on your friends. We have a very special friend we're going to rip on, named Eamon. Eamon O'Shea is one of our good buddies, and we're going to rip on him real quick. So Eamon is a cool dude. He's one of the best dudes I know, but
I thought you weren't losing last names, motherfucker.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Whatever.
O'Shea. Eamon O'Shea.
He lives at no. He's so
not finding.
So Eamon tells great stories and is a great talker, but you can't get a straight answer out of him. So I will ask Eamon, can you do this? Or can you be here at a certain time? Or can we, are we doing this? And instead of telling me instead of telling me any pertinent information, he'll tell me a limerick. He'll be like, there once was a man from Montgomery Center who went down to the bar and had a bender. I'm like, Eamon, I don't need a limerick. I just want an answer. And it will literally take another half an hour to an hour to get any straight answer out of him. And that's my rip on Eamon.
So it's my turn? Okay, so my issue with Shady O'Shea, Mr. Eamon Shady O'Shea, is that guy just decided to freaking pick up, leave the country, because he could, and God bless him for it. I mean, I may choose to do the same. He left, and yet in the fascinating modern age we live in, with communication and global technology and the ability to Facebook and do this whole Zoom nonsense and all this other stuff, he decides that he's going to continue to rip on our society and offer only negatives and no positives and say, well, why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? I'm sorry, I'm still on American soil, motherfucker. Like, you decided to take your family and leave. You don't get to tell me what to do now. Okay, that's not fair. It's not right. And that's my issue with Eamon, is that once you decide to pick up your life in America and go to another place, you don't get to tell other Americans how to make it better at home. Okay, if you want to tuck tail and run, that's your business. But once you do that, you better stay facing the other way, pal.
I hope Eamon hears the show. He's going to have some words for us, and I'm ready for him. So that was our show for today. Thank you for joining us. Kyle, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you. Woo! Time for another martini.
And we'll see you guys next time. This was the Holographic Podcast, signing off.